I can count a handful of people who were really, truly there for me after mom and dad died. I mean, like real, true friends. Um, but it was, I mean, it still is difficult, but it was so difficult dealing with that.
How many of those people allow you to have your voice?
The ones that were there for me then, um,
And you, how many people in your life allow you to have your voice?
I mean, a good portion of those, but again, I mean, a handful. We're talking like 5, 6 people.
Right.
And unfortunately, like we were talking about adult friendships a while ago, unfortunately, the people who were there for me the most live in California, live in Ohio, live in Nashville. I mean, like, live in North Carolina, South Carolina. Like, they don't live here.
Right.
So it's me texting, texting them or, Google Meet or something and being like, hey, can I just vent for a second? Or there's a really good friend of mine that lives north of Nashville, and she was really good and still is really good about no matter what, if I need anything, I'll just shoot her a message and just, hey, I'm having a really tough day. And she'll send me back a picture of her cat. And it's like, I need that. That's an acknowledgement that I understand and that she knows I understand. You know, I don't, and a lot of people going through grief, it's like when I was first getting certified as a grief coach and a grief educator, I would say, I don't know how to talk to someone who's lost a child. Like that to me, I am really good at being with someone who's lost parents, siblings, anyone else. Someone who's lost a child, to me, that is a different kind of grief.
Indeed.
That is a whole other level. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got was from um, this instructor, and she had lost a child. And she said, we just want somebody to listen. She said, you don't have to talk to us about anything. She said, we just want somebody to listen.
And that, I think that's just, I should just, yeah, that's just a good rule for anything.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to show that you have some sort of empathy, compassion.
Right. And and I tell you what grief brings out. It brings out those true friends, and it weeds out the people who aren't, the people who you thought you thought that that this person was going to be there for you in your darkest moment. And you know what grief does? Grief shines a light on them and says, nope,
Nope.
they're not going to be there for you. They're not.
Even though they may be there for you in different ways, there's something about grief that really separates.
Mm.
It separates those that need to be separated, and it brings those that need to be together together.
Yes. Yes. And I would say that I would uh, I would say that those people, those friends who have been there for me, I think it's also brought us closer because when you're dealing with grief, I mean, that's one of those deep subjects, right? That's one of those, you're not having just a surface level chit chat conversation when you're talking about grief.
Yeah.
It is a It's a deep conversation, and it's you are opening yourself up. You both are. The person who's listening and the person who's grieving. You're opening yourself up to really deep emotional stuff. And I feel like the friends, and even though these friends and we've known each other for years, I still feel like this in the conversations that we've had have brought us closer. And I know that since then, we've had more and different, deep, meaningful conversations. So, in a weird way, I'm kind of grateful. Weird to be grateful for grief, but I'm grateful that my grief has allowed certain friendships to deepen.
Yes. Human connection.
Human connection.
It's a bigger puzzle piece that gets together when grief is involved.
I mean, you know, yeah, it's our humanity. Go ahead.
I know that this conversation will, uh, we're going to have many the conversation about this because, again, you said it's very complex and it's very painful.
Understatement.
I remember when you first came to me about this, it was about creativity and how grief stifles and uh, also can be processed and how it's used in creativity and how it affects a person and what they do. Before we really delve into that, I'm going to ask you this question now, and I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay.
But I want to know how grief has affected your creativity at this moment, because I know that as a writer, it's affected your as obviously it's affected career
Mm.
because you're now a counselor. Obviously, it's affected what you're doing now. So I know at times I wouldn't say stifled you right, but I know at times there were definite blocks that you had to work through. There were definite changes in the way that you wrote before and after grief. There are, it's amazing how grief takes what you thought were limitations. It's amazing how grief opens us up to possibility because what the were we thinking? Anyway, I'm getting too far ahead, but and I'm haven't actually let you answer the question, so I'm going to let you do that.
I'm going to try to answer that question. That was a multifaceted question.
I know. I'm sorry.
It's like, you know what I think it does, what grief does to creativity, at least in my experience, is it sort of strips away the innocence and the naivety. When I was in film school, I wrote a script about a girl who loses her mother. It was a short film. And I've thought about that script since my mom died. And, there was really no layers to it. There was really no depth to it. So, my favorite book ever is Little Women. My grandmother gave me my first copy of Little Women when I was like 8 years old. One of the things that Joe learns, one of the many lessons she learns is write what you know. And at first, she doesn't do that. Joe does not write when she's trying to write and she's trying to be a writer and she's earning $5 per story and she's writing about all of these like vampires and all of these whimsical, fantastical things. And when she first meets the professor, he's like, "Dude, why are you writing this?" He never comes right out and says, "This isn't good," but you can tell he's like, "There's more to you than these piddly little fantastical penny piece stories that you're writing." And it's not, spoiler, 200-year-old spoiler. It's not until Beth dies, her sister, that Joe is finally able to write. She's finally able to write Little Women. And it becomes like this enormous bestseller. And it's because she wrote what she knew. She wrote about her family. She wrote about grief, everything that they went through. And she also, what she wrote was relatable. And I think that you have to tap into that because, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a screenwriter. I had this conversation with him recently about pulling from life and pulling from things that you know. And it can be scary at first
Yeah.
because you are opening yourself up to vulnerability. But, but here's how I look at it. When my dad died, this is a year after my mom died. My dad died in April of 2020, so the beginning of the pandemic. Couldn't really have a funeral for him, just graveside services. It was the pandemic. I I you know me, I have lived on my own for many years, but I have never felt so alone as I did after they both died and during the pandemic. To be in this house, surrounded by all their stuff, like you say, like a museum, and no one to talk to. I mean, my mom and I had breakfast together every morning. We like we all three of us, my mom, my dad, and I, we all had supper together every night. So suddenly you're alone and it's so isolating. And, I finally, through a mutual friend, I knew this therapist. And so I started seeing her because I told her, I said, I cannot get over the hump. I cannot climb out of this pit of despair to breathe. And she helped me get there and get over that hump. And from that point forward, when I climbed out of that pit, I told myself, if there's anything I can do to help someone else not feel so alone in their grief, because it was debilitating at times. It was, I mean, no one prepares you for that. No one prepares you for that. You don't know there's no manual for grief. There are books, but they're not. Here's the thing about grief. It's so universal, but yet so unique to each individual. Like a mom in India can lose her child and she's grieving. Me here in Tennessee, in the United States, I lose my parents and I'm grieving. We both get grief. We both understand grief, but I don't know what her grief is like. And she doesn't know what my grief is like. It's different because the relationships with the people that we lost are so unique. You know, we lose those relationships. And, you can grow up in the same household, but yet the relationship that I had with my mom is not the same as the relationship that my sister had with my mom. That's different. So we're going to grieve differently. And the same with my brother. Like it's not the same.
No.
And I think people who haven't lost anyone, they don't get that. That in the same family, you're all gonna grieve differently.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
creatively, I yeah, once I got over that hump of where I wasn't dreading getting out of bed every day and just I mean, you wanna talk about Groundhog Day. It felt like I was living Groundhog Day every single day after my dad died. I'm like, "Wait, wait, this is the reality I'm still in? How do I change this?"
Yeah.
But I just wanted to do something to help other people so that other people and I don't know where that came from. I think it was just more like, "Oh my gosh." Because I knew how I felt, and I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. So whatever I could do, if it was writing a cute little story about a duck who loses his friend or doing this or being a grief coach and talking to people or letting them just talk. Or like what usually happens is I'll be in the grocery store and people will stop me and just want to talk and be like, "Hey, is this normal? I lost my dad or I lost my and is this normal?" It's but it's yes, my writing is different because I'm different. Because I'm not the same person that I was before I lost mom and dad. Oh, I that took a while to accept because I was still trying to, I think, hold on to that life before.
Yeah.
And it took a while to let go of that and to be like, no, you can't go back to that life. You know, in Bambi, when Bambi's mother gets shot and, and, and his father comes up and is like, you can never see your mother again. That's what it feels like. And you're like, sorry, Bambi. Sorry, Bambi. You got to move on because you can never go back to that life again. It's gone. I mean, that was a cruel way to say it to Bambi,
Yeah.
but that's what happens. Like,
Uh,
you can never ever go back.
there's no thinking about it. There's no giving you time to process it. Nope. You got to go. Life's changed.
And speaking of no time to process, like the day after my mom died, because again, keep in mind, my father can't do anything for himself. He comes up to me. I was in the kitchen because that would have been a Sunday. She died on Saturday. So the next day would have been Sunday. He stayed home from we stayed home from church because we just couldn't.
Yeah.
And I think I was in the kitchen and he comes in there and he said, "Were you gonna wash any clothes?" I was like, "Yes, I can wash some clothes."
Yeah.
So it's like back to life. You want a minute. Again, smidge. We just sort of smidge to figure out what's going on because it's yeah. So yeah, creativity is it's weird how the creativity changes. You can be creative your whole life, but watching how that creativity sort of ebbs and flows with events and experiences in your life, and this is nothing new. This is artists and painters have, look at the impressionists. I mean, this has been happening for all of human existence. But you know, to observe it in your own life and to recognize it in your own life is a whole other thing. To be like, "Oh, I still think of myself as 18, actually 21. I think of myself as 21 still. That was a good year." I still think like that's where my brain is 21. And I
Right.
think it will forever because that was the first year too that I ever lived on my own. So I will forever be stuck up here at 21.
Yeah.
And so thinking, well, hey, I'm still 21. This is where I am. Knowing now how little I knew then and how little I knew about life, how little I knew about everything, you know, we won't get into relationships, but how that can also stifle creativity. But
Oh,
how that whole
and
journey has changed.
how relationships deal with grief.
Hmm. Mm.
That's that's a that's another longer conversation now.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. That's kind of a rambling answer, but that's an answer.
Again, when we have the big conversation about creativity and grief, I'll ask you there.
I've really been paying attention to like movies and TV shows lately and how certain characters and certain films and shows deal with grief. There are two shows that I want to watch and I haven't been able to bring myself to watch yet. Two shows that deal with grief. Shrinking and Severance.
Right.
And I want to watch both of them, but this is another thing. I cannot watch certain movies, shows anymore since I lost my parents because it's too much. I have to be in a certain headspace in order to even watch something anymore. I have to
Cool.
go into it and I've got to where I will pull up IMDb and I will look for the spoilers. And I'm like, no, you got to tell me what's coming. I need to know what's coming. I want to know all the spoilers. Is somebody dying? I will even Google, is the dog dead? Like,
Oh,
tell me now
yeah.
because I got to know whether or not I'm going to watch this. It's like one of my favorite shows is Outlander. Love Outlander. I have not watched the last 2 seasons because I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen, but I can't watch it because I know what that's going to do to me. And I know that certain things stay with me now longer than they used to. They
Right.
would stay with me for days and it would
Yeah.
put me in a mood. And it's like the reason why I don't go to funerals anymore. Like the only ones I will go to, immediate family. I can't, you know, I can't do it.
I I was having this conversation just today of I'm not going to a funeral.
No, I will text if I know the person, I will text them and be like, "I am so sorry. I will give my condolences to the family. I cannot physically be there." I actually, in fact, anyone who saw me last year at my uncle's funeral, I almost had a panic attack. One, because it was at the church where my parents went, where I went.
Mm.
Had not been since my dad died. Again, that's a different conversation because there's a reason why I haven't been back. But they sat me on the pew where my parents used to sit. And I had so much nervous energy flowing through me. Number one, I was just back at a funeral and it was just so happened to be the place where my mom's funeral was. And I was essentially having a panic attack. I would stand up and I would sit down because I could not. Oh, and by the way, it was
No.
also my uncle's funeral last year was 4 years to the day since my dad died. So, needless to say, I can't go to funerals anymore. I mean, have to be immediate family or a very, very close friend. I mean, I can't. I can't.
I'll send you a text, send you flowers.
It's just it's so difficult. And I also planned my mom and my dad's funerals, and it's just it's so much, and your my brain can only take so much anymore, and things stick with me. Things more so now than they used to, but things stay with me now, and I can't do it, and I've apologized to some people. I can't be there. I'm so sorry, but I just can't be there. So,
It's where grief becomes sticky.
sticky grief.
It becomes sticky. It's like you're covered in stick. And those feelings, those moments, those little things that everyone else, for some reason, it flies over their head, or maybe they're just not thinking about it, or it just is so natural or nonchalant, or it's already there. You know what's already happened, and it's there. It's not going anywhere. And only moving forward with whatever occasion, situation, rooming only makes this, it becomes so raw, agitated, painful, absolutely painful. This thing that it starts physically affecting you in ways that you didn't know that you could feel.
Mhm. Yes.
And it's just got grief written all over it. And it's become sticky.
Do you think the next book should be George the Duck and Sticky Grief? Like, I can see George explaining sticky grief.
I mean, just walking through a thistle patch,
And
like, is
and
it something, is that like getting a burl? Like,
I gotta think about this.
sometimes because the you can't keep walking through it, you're gonna get more on you. And sometimes you can't get the ones. It's too you're gonna need help getting those off.
And how do you get it off when you have feathers?
You right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good analogy though, and a good visual, because that is what it feels like. And it's I tell you what else it is. It was suffocating. And part of that was the panic attack. Um, I mean, I was and people were trying to come up to me and hug me, and
Don't
some people that I hadn't seen in a while, and I was just I mean, on the in you could not see it, but I was and I just thought if I don't and listen, I don't like to be around a lot of people anymore, like crowds. I don't like crowds anymore. It makes me nervous.
mm,
And also because
break my exits.
it's like sensory overload for me. It truly is. It's like when my sister wanted to take me to Buc-ee's for the first time, and I latched onto my nephew, and I was like, "Please just get me out of here." That was my first and last trip to Buc-ee's. I will not be going back. It was so much. I
Yeah.
can't. So, yeah, so I don't do crowds, I don't do and so when there are so many people wanting to come right up to you.
Only because I've known you for so long,
Mhm.
but if people can't look at you and know when you are vibrating on the inside and to just, "Hey, Allison, there's a nice quiet room back there. You know what? We'll just call on you later."
At first, I thought that this was, like, just a getting older thing, but now I think it's just a me thing of where I no, um, I don't. And I will say this has gotten worse since mom and dad died, and I don't know if grief so I this is not a trendy thing in case anybody's wondering. I have actually been late diagnosed ADHD. Grief can bring about stress, which can make ADHD worse. And I think that the enormous stress that I was under with mom and dad's deaths has made the small ADHD that I had been managing and masking so well for decades. A friend of mine asked me, texted me one day and asked me how I was doing. And I was like, my brain won't shut up. Like it was just on hyperdrive. And I was like, I cannot shut my brain off.
I wouldn't necessarily give that all to grief, the unmasking. I would also say it's because they're not there,
Mhm.
because you're not having to mask it.
Although strangely looking back at some of my mom's um quirks, I'm like, huh,
Yeah.
I wonder if she had ADHD. Like some of the things that she would do and say and or not do, I'm like, you know what?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Mm, again, something I wish that I could so many things that I wish I could tell them and say to them, of course they wouldn't believe life on this planet right now, but I don't think that they would believe everything that I have been through and everything with this house and everything that's happened since they died. They would not believe it. And I just wish, how you just wish you could get their reactions to things? Like that's what I want. That's what I miss is I miss their reactions to things, among other things.
Do you still look for their approval?